The Eye of Terror convulsed. Across the warp, ancient entities that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations felt something impossible, a force so utterly alien to their reality that even chaos itself recoiled. The crimson maelstrom that had devoured entire star systems for 10,000 years shuddered. On Terra, Inquisitor Seraphis stared at the tactical hologram with trembling hands. The readings made no sense. A single humanoid figure, standing in the void where moments before a demon prince the size of a battleship had existed. No psychic signature, no warp disturbance, just emptiness where something vast and terrible should have been. "My lord," whispered Commissar Albrecht, his voice barely audible above the proximity alarms. "The target appears to be..." scratching his head. 3 hours earlier, that same unremarkable figure had fallen from a tear in reality above the most sacred world in the Imperium, wearing civilian clothes and asking directions to a grocery store. Now, as fragmentary Vox transmissions crackled through the void, reports flooded in of Chaos fleets simply vanishing. Entire demon legions obliterated by a single punch. The being they had designated Alpha-level threat was looking around with the expression of someone mildly annoyed by a disrupted shopping trip. "What manner of creature," Seraphis breathed, "ends 10 millennia of war with a yawn?" The sky above Terra bled crimson. Warp storms had ravaged the throne world's upper atmosphere for 17 days, their eldritch energies casting an unholy aurora across the endless sprawl of the Imperial Palace. From the Sanctum Imperialis to the deepest hab blocks of the Senatorum. Imperialis, 8 billion souls cowered beneath skies that wept madness and whispered blasphemies in tongues that predated humanity's first breath. Commissar Albrecht Voss stood upon the marble steps of the Cathedral of the Savior Emperor, his weathered face illuminated by the pulsing crimson light above. His augmetic eye whirred as it focused on the tactical data slate clutched in his left hand, recording atmospheric disturbances that made even the most veteran astropaths weep blood. 17 standard days of this torment, and still the storms intensified. "The Emperor protects," he murmured, making the sign of the Aquila across his chest with practiced reverence. But even his faith felt brittle against the weight of the unnatural tempest overhead. Behind him, the cathedral's massive doors groaned open, disgorging a procession of hooded figures in crimson robes. The Ordo Hereticus had come to Terra, their very presence, a testament to the severity of the crisis. Inquisitor Seraphis, resplendent in his carapace armor, adorned with purity seals, descended the steps with measured purpose. The skull-shaped servo-skull hovering at his shoulder cast an eerie glow across his scarred features. "The purge proceeds as ordained," Seraphis intoned his voice, carrying the authority of 10,000 years of imperial doctrine. 17 heretics have been cleansed this day. Their corruption shall not spread." Albrecht nodded curtly. It was necessary work even if it felt like emptying an ocean with a thimble. The warp storms had brought more than mere atmospheric disturbance. They had brought whispers of change, of hope, of things that threatened the rigid order upon which the Imperium survived. Such thoughts were virus and cancer combined, spreading through the populace like wildfire. In the distance, the colossal spires of the Imperial Palace pierced the roiling clouds, their adamantium peaks crowned with defensive batteries that could shatter entire fleets. Yet for all their might, they seemed fragile against the cosmic horror writhing overhead. The very air tasted of ozone and something else, something that made Albrecht's skin crawl despite his decades of service. Commissar Seraphis continued, his augmetic implants glowing softly in the crimson light. "The astropaths report increasing instability in the local warp currents. We may need to..." The sky tore open. Not metaphorically, not gradually, but with the sudden violence of reality being shredded like parchment. Where moments before there had been only the familiar horror of warp storm, now there was something infinitely worse, a wound in existence itself, perfectly circular, perhaps 50 meters across, through which absolute darkness poured forth. Every alarm in the sector began screaming at once. Void shields across the palace district flickered and died. The servo skull fell from the sky like a stone, its machine spirit overwhelmed by whatever emanated from that impossible breach. In the streets below, civilians threw themselves to the ground, some praying, others simply screaming. Albrecht's augmetic eye sparked and died, but his organic vision was more than sufficient to witness what happened next. Something fell from the darkness. Not a demon, not a drop pod, not any manner of threat his decades of experience had prepared him to classify. A single humanoid figure tumbling through the air with the casual indifference of a man who had simply tripped down a flight of stairs. The figure wore what appeared to be civilian clothing, a bright yellow garment with a hood matching pants, and what looked suspiciously like rubber sandals. No power armor, no weapons visible, no sigils of rank or allegiance. Just an ordinary-looking human male, completely bald with an expression of mild confusion, visible even from this distance. He struck the marble plaza before the cathedral with the force of a falling meteorite. The impact crater extended 50 meters in every direction, radiating cracks through marble that had withstood 10 millennia of imperial glory. Dust and debris cascaded from nearby buildings as the shock wave propagated outward. Yet when the dust settled, the figure was simply standing there, brushing small particles from his strange yellow garment with the air of someone mildly annoyed by an inconvenience. Silence claimed the plaza for 3 heartbeats. Then the bells began tolling. Alert klaxons wailed across the palace district. From hidden alcoves and concealed positions, a full complement of Adeptus Custodes materialized, their guardian spears crackling with power fields, their auramite armor gleaming even in the eldritch light. The figure looked around with obvious confusion, his gaze sweeping across the assembled might of the Emperor's personal guard, the Inquisition forces, and the thousands of civilians who had thrown themselves prostrate in terror or religious ecstasy. The figure said, his voice carrying clearly across the plaza, despite speaking at conversational volume. "Excuse me, but is this City Z, Custodian Commander Valorian veteran of campaigns that spanned millennia, raised his guardian spear?" The weapon's energy field hummed with barely contained death, its machine spirit eager to taste the blood of the Emperor's enemies. Around him, his brother guardians formed a perfect circle of golden death, each movement precise, calculated, inevitable. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind," Valorian's voice boomed through his armor's vox grills. "Identify yourself, your allegiance, and your purpose upon the most sacred soil of Terra." The figure scratched his head, disturbing the complete lack of hair there. "Sorry, I think I got lost again. I was just trying to get to the grocery store for the Saturday sale. They had cabbage marked down to 98 yen per head. Do you know if there's a supermarket around here anywhere?" The silence that followed this statement stretched until it became physically uncomfortable. Inquisitor Seraphis stepped forward, his power sword remaining sheathed, but his hand resting meaningfully upon its grip. His remaining organic eye studied the intruder with the intensity of a man accustomed to identifying threats to the very soul of humanity. "You claim to be lost," Seraphis said slowly, each word weighted with suspicion earned through centuries of hunting heretics. "Yet you have manifested upon Terra through means that defy comprehension. You speak of currencies unknown to imperial economics and seek vendors of foodstuffs with alien terminology. These facts suggest infiltration by Xenos forces, or worse, corruption by the ruinous powers themselves." The figure blinked. "Ruinous what now?" "Look, I just need directions. I was walking to the store, and then there was this weird swirling thing in the sky, and then I was falling, and now I'm here." He gestured vaguely at the destruction around him. "Sorry about the mess, by the way. That happens sometimes when I land." In the crowd of prostrate civilians, whispers began to spread like ripples on a poisoned pond. An old woman, her face marked by decades of labor in the manufactorums, raised her head just enough to glimpse the stranger. Her eyes widened with something that might have been hope, a commodity rarer than adamantium on Terra. "A saint," she whispered the words, barely audible. "The Emperor has sent us a saint." The whisper spread, mutating as it passed from mouth to mouth. A saint, a savior, deliverance from the storms that had tormented their world for 17 days. The crowd began to stir, some daring to lift their heads, others pressing their faces even more firmly against the marble, as if proximity to the holy ground might grant them benediction. Custodian Commander Valorian's tactical assessment protocols were screaming warnings directly into his neural cortex. Threat level unknown. Classification impossible. Recommended action immediate termination. Yet something stayed his hand. Perhaps the complete lack of malice emanating from the figure. Perhaps simple confusion at the unprecedented nature of the situation. "You will submit to examination," Valorian commanded, "or face the consequences of defying the Adeptus Custodes upon Terra itself." The figure, who had yet to identify himself by any name or title, looked around at the golden-armored giants surrounding him, then at the Inquisition forces, then at the civilians. His expression remained one of mild bewilderment, as if he had wandered into someone else's surprise party and was unsure of the proper etiquette. "Okay," he said simply. "But after that, could someone maybe point me toward a grocery store? I really do need to get those vegetables." Commissar Albrecht, his organic eye darting between the impossible figure and his malfunctioning data slate, began composing what he suspected would be the most important report of his career. His fingers trembled slightly as he input the initial classification, subject unknown humanoid entity. Arrival warp breach above Palace District, threat assessment pending, initial observations, claims to be lost civilians seeking commercial food vendors. Impact suggests kinetic force equivalent to orbital bombardment, yet subject shows no signs of injury or hostile intent. Request immediate consultation with Ordo Malleus. As he transmitted the report through military channels, Albrecht could not shake the feeling that this unremarkable-looking man in civilian clothes had just irrevocably altered the course of human history. Whether for good or ill remained to be seen. The warp storms above continued their eldritch dance, but somehow they seemed less oppressive now, as if even the powers of chaos were holding their breath to see what would unfold in the plaza before the Cathedral of the Savior Emperor. And at the center of it all, the stranger who called himself Lost continued to look around with the patient expression of someone waiting for directions to the nearest shopping center. The Guardian Spear's energy field hummed with barely contained violence as Custodian Commander Valorian raised the weapon. Around him, 11 of the Emperor's finest formed a perfect circle of golden death, their movements synchronized with the precision that only 10 millennia of training could achieve. Each was a living weapon crafted by the master of mankind himself to be the ultimate protectors of humanity's holiest world. Final warning. Valorian's voice boomed through his helm's vox grills. Submit to Imperial authority or face immediate termination. The strange figure in yellow looked around the circle of Guardian Spears with the expression of someone trying to solve a mildly interesting puzzle. His gaze lingered on the ornate decorations adorning the Custod's armor, the purity seals fluttering in the charged air, the skull-faced servo skulls hovering overhead like mechanical vultures. "Is this some kind of costume party?" he asked with genuine curiosity. "The armor's pretty impressive. Must have cost a fortune." That sealed it. Whatever this entity was, Demon Xenos infiltrator or something worse, it was clearly attempting to mock the sacred traditions of the Adeptus Custodes. Valorian's training, honed across centuries of warfare against humanity's enemies, triggered his combat protocols. Open fire. 12 Guardian Spears discharged simultaneously, their energy beams converging on the target with mathematical precision. The very air ionized around the concentrated firepower, casting stark shadows across the marble plaza. The sound was like thunder, compressed into a single devastating note that shattered windows 3 blocks away. When the light faded and the ozone-scented smoke cleared, the target was still standing exactly where he had been, apparently unharmed. His yellow garment showed no signs of damage. His skin bore no burns. He wasn't even blinking. "Huh," the figure said, patting his chest where the energy beams had struck. That felt kind of warm, like a really mild sun lamp. Valorian's tactical assessment subroutines crashed and rebooted 3 times in rapid succession. Guardian spears were weapons capable of punching through the armor of chaos terminators, of reducing demons to component atoms, of bringing down structures that had weathered the bombardments of the Horus heresy. What he had just witnessed was not merely improbable, it was impossible. "Increase power to maximum," he commanded, his voice carrying none of the uncertainty he felt. "Full dispersal pattern." The second volley came not as focused beams, but as a widespread barrage designed to eliminate any possibility of evasion. Energy fields overlapped and reinforced each other, creating a storm of destruction that would have reduced a space marine to vapor and memory. The figure weathered this assault with the same mild interest he had shown the first, occasionally glancing up at the light show, as if it were an unusually elaborate fireworks display. "You guys sure use a lot of special effects," he observed when the barrage finally ceased. "Are you filming something I don't see any cameras around?" Inquisitor Seraphis stepped forward, his scarred features tight with the concentration of a man performing rapid threat assessment calculations. His bionic eye whirred as it cycled through scanning spectrums, searching for any explanation that didn't require him to rewrite everything he knew about physics. "Enough," he commanded, raising a hand to forestall another attack. "Stand down, Custodian Commander. We are dealing with something beyond conventional military response." Valorian's grip tightened on his weapon, but he obeyed. The Inquisition's authority in matters of the supernatural was absolute, even on Terra. Around the plaza, whispered prayers rose from the prostrate civilians, their terror now mingled with something that might have been awe. Seraphis approached the anomaly with the measured steps of a man who had spent centuries identifying threats to humanity's soul. His remaining organic eye studied the figure with intensity that bordered on the religious. "You claim to seek directions," the Inquisitor said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Yet you have demonstrated resilience to weapons blessed by the Emperor himself. No mortal man could survive what we have unleashed upon you. Therefore, you are either no mortal man or you serve powers that grant protection beyond the material realm." The figure scratched his head again, a gesture that was becoming familiar. "I really don't know what you mean. I'm just Saitama. I'm a hero for fun, and right now I'm trying to get to the Saturday sale at the grocery store." He paused, looking around at the assembled forces with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Are you guys okay? You seem really stressed out about something." "Saitama." Seraphis tested the name, finding it alien on his tongue. No language in the Imperial archives contained such a designation. "You claim heroism as profession, yet serve no recognized organization within the Imperium. This suggests either criminal activity or Xenos influence." "Imperium," Saitama blinked. "Never heard of it. Is that like a corporation or something?" The silence that followed this statement was so profound that it seemed to drain sound from the very air. Every human within earshot custodes Inquisition forces civilians process the implications of someone who had never heard of the Imperium of Man. It was like claiming ignorance of the existence of stars or gravity or death itself. "Impossible," whispered Commissar Albrecht, his organic eye wide with shock. "Every human soul in the galaxy knows of the Emperor's dominion." Saitama shrugged, a gesture of such casual indifference that it somehow managed to be more unsettling than outright hostility. "Sorry, but I've really never heard of any Emperor. I'm from City Z, and we just have a mayor and a city council. Pretty boring stuff, actually." Seraphis felt the familiar chill of encountering something that defied classification. In his centuries of service to the Ordo Hereticus, he had faced demons that wore human skin, Xenos that mimicked human form, and cultists so deeply corrupted that they barely remembered their own species. But this was different. This was either the most sophisticated infiltrator he had ever encountered, or something else entirely. "You will submit to examination," he declared, drawing his power sword in a motion smooth as silk. The blade hummed to life its energy field, casting eerie shadows across his scarred features. Compliance is not optional. Okay, Saitama said agreeably. But could we maybe do it somewhere with less pointing and shouting? I get that you're upset about something, but I really haven't done anything wrong. As if to emphasize his point, he took a step forward, and his foot caught on a piece of debris from his impact crater. To steady himself, he reached out and grabbed what appeared to be the nearest solid object, which happened to be the corner of a Titan-class defensive wall that had protected the cathedral district for 6,000 years. The wall, constructed from adamantium and ceramite, reinforced with prayers and blessed oils, adorned with the skulls of saints and the weapons of heroes, crumbled in his grip like dry sand. 17 meters of fortifications simply ceased to exist, leaving a gap large enough to drive a land raider through. Saitama looked at the handful of dust that had once been one of Terra's most sacred defensive structures, then at the massive hole where the wall used to be. "Oops," he said. "Sorry about that. I'm still getting used to this whole thing." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Every weapon system in the plaza swiveled toward him. Alert klaxons wailed across the palace district. Emergency protocols activated throughout the Senatorum Imperialis. Somewhere in the depths of the Imperial Palace, cogitators began calculating the tactical implications of a being capable of destroying blessed fortifications with casual contact. Inquisitor Seraphis felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. He had just witnessed a demonstration of power that rivaled the legendary feats of the Primarchs themselves. If this entity could destroy adamantium barriers by accident, what could it accomplish with intent? Alpha-level threat. He voxed to his command staff, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he had witnessed. "Initiate containment protocols. Do not repeat. Do not attempt termination at this time." Saitama, oblivious to the tactical reassessment taking place around him, continued to examine the debris in his hand with mild scientific interest. "That's weird," he mused. "Usually things are tougher than that. Maybe the construction quality isn't very good around here." He looked up hopefully at the assembled forces. "So about those directions to the grocery store." Commissar Albrecht, his hands shaking slightly as he updated his report, began typing what he suspected would be the understatement of the millennium subject, demonstrates casual destruction capabilities beyond current threat assessment parameters. Recommend immediate consultation with highest available authorities. The throne preserve us all. In the distance, the warp storms continued their eldritch dance, but somehow they seemed less significant now. Whatever cosmic horror they represented paled beside the simple, terrifying question of what to do with a being who could accidentally destroy the defenses of Terra itself while asking for directions to buy vegetables. And at the center of it all, Saitama waited patiently for someone to give him directions, apparently unaware that he had just become the most dangerous individual on the most heavily defended world in human space. The War Council, convened in the depths of the Imperial Palace, took exactly 17 minutes to reach a decision that would have been unthinkable mere hours before. Inquisitor Seraphis stood before a hololithic display showing tactical data from across the Segmentum Obscurus, his scarred features illuminated by the crimson light of worlds under siege. "The entity demonstrates capabilities that exceed our current understanding," he reported to the assembled High Lords. "Termination appears impossible with conventional means. Therefore, I propose we redirect this asset toward a tactical application." Lord Commander Gilliman's voice crackled through the secure Vox link from Macraga, carrying the authority of 10,000 years of strategic experience. "Explain your reasoning, Inquisitor." Mordian 7 has been under chaos siege for 43 days. 3 regiments of Astra Militarum are trapped planetside, along with approximately 6 million civilians. Our relief efforts have been unsuccessful. Seraphis gestured to the tactical display where red indicators showed chaos forces advancing on multiple fronts. If this Saitama can accidentally destroy fortifications on Terra, perhaps he can intentionally destroy the enemy threatening our people. The silence that followed lasted exactly 37 seconds, Seraphis counted. When Gilliman's response came, it carried the weight of absolute command. Do it, but maintain full monitoring protocols. If the asset shows any sign of corruption or hostile intent, you are authorized to deploy exterminatus protocols. Understood, my lord. The transition from Terra's sacred soil to the embattled surface of Mordian 7 took place aboard the strike cruiser Purity Ascendant. Saitama spent the entire journey seated in what had once been a holding cell, but which the ship's crew had hastily converted into something resembling guest quarters, mainly by removing the bars and adding a small table. He seemed fascinated by the ship's operation, asking questions that demonstrated a complete ignorance of basic Imperial technology, while simultaneously revealing an unsettling grasp of advanced physics principles that even the tech Marines couldn't fully comprehend. So you're saying this whole ship travels through a dimension where emotions and thoughts become real? He asked during one of his conversations with Commissar Albrecht, who had been assigned as his primary liaison. That sounds pretty dangerous. What happens if someone has a nightmare while you're traveling? Albrecht's organic eye twitched. The entity had just described warp travel with more accuracy than most Imperial Guard officers achieved after decades of service. Yet he claimed complete ignorance of the Imperium's existence. The Geller field protects us from such manifestations, he explained carefully. Huh, like a psychic barrier. That's pretty smart. Saitama nodded appreciatively. The people who built this stuff must be really good engineers. The Emperor protects, Albrecht replied automatically, though he was beginning to suspect that whatever protected this strange man in yellow was far more reliable than even the master of mankind's blessing. Mordian 7th was dying. The planet's industrial cities burned beneath skies the color of old blood, their smoke plumes reaching toward a sun that had been dimmed by the psychic emanations of chaos. From orbit, the world looked like a festering wound in space, its surface crawling with the corrupt armies of the dark gods. Saitama pressed his face against the observation deck's armored glass, watching the planetary surface drift by below. It doesn't look very nice down there, he observed. Are those cities supposed to be on fire like that? No, Inquisitor Seraphis replied grimly. They are not. The dropship Emperor's Wrath carried them through the planet's tortured atmosphere in a descent that would have challenged even experienced stormtroopers. Anti-aircraft fire from chaos positions lit the sky around them, each burst close enough to rattle the ship's hull plates. Yet their passengers seemed entirely unperturbed by the violence exploding around them. Is this normal for public transportation here? Saitama asked as a particularly close burst sent debris cascading across the ship's armored canopy. Nothing about this situation is normal, Seraphis muttered under his breath. They landed in what had once been the city of Hive Mordian's primary commercial district. Now it resembled something from humanity's darkest nightmares, a twisted landscape of corrupted architecture where buildings grew teeth and streets pulsed with unnatural life. The very air tasted of copper and decay. Colonel Castor of the 47th Mordian Iron Guard met them at the hastily established landing zone, his regiment's distinctive red and blue uniform stained with 43 days of continuous warfare. His augmetic arm whirred as he saluted the mechanical limb, a testament to the price his men had paid defending this cursed ground. Inquisitor. He reported, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. The enemy has broken through our outer perimeter. We estimate 2 hours before they overrun our position entirely. Seraphis nodded grimly. Show me the tactical situation. As the colonel spread a battered map across an improvised table, pointing out enemy positions and remaining defensive assets, Saitama wandered away from the group. He seemed more interested in examining the corrupted architecture than listening to military briefings. Excuse me, he called to a nearby guardsman who nearly jumped out of his flak armor at being directly addressed by the mysterious figure. Do you know if there are any grocery stores around here? I'm still looking for that cabbage sale. The guardsman stared at him with the expression of a man whose sanity had been stretched to its breaking point. Sir, this is a war zone. The stores are all destroyed. Oh, Saitama looked genuinely disappointed. That's too bad. I guess I'll have to find somewhere else to shop. A sound like reality tearing itself apart echoed across the battlefield. The sky split open in a wound of crimson light, and something vast began pushing its way through from the realm beyond. First came claws the size of land raiders, then a head that belonged in humanity's oldest nightmares, and finally the full form of a greater demon of corn, a bloodthirster, whose very presence made the air around it ignite. The creature stood 30 meters tall, its brass armor reflecting the flames of the burning city. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of every sword that had ever drawn blood, every battle that had ever been fought. Mortals. It roared the sound-shattering windows 3 kilometers away. I am Scarbrand the Exiled. I bring the wrath of the blood god to this pitiful world. Colonel Castor's face went pale beneath his weathered features. His remaining organic hand moved automatically to his bolt pistol, though he knew such weapons were useless against a creature of this magnitude. Around the landing zone, his guardsmen took what cover they could find, their training, warring with the primitive fear that chaos demons inspired in baseline humanity. Emperor, preserve us, someone whispered. Saitama looked up from his examination of a corrupted street lamp, noticed the towering demon, and sighed. Another weird costume, he said conversationally. And this one's really loud, too. The bloodthirster's burning gaze fixed upon the small figure in yellow, and its brass features twisted into what might have been confusion. Here was a mortal who showed no fear, no rage, no emotion at all that it could feed upon. This was unusual. You do not flee, little mortal, Scarbrand rumbled, raising its massive axe. Good. Your skull will make a fine addition to Korn's throne. Sorry, Saitama replied politely, but I'm not really interested in fighting right now. I'm trying to find a grocery store. The demon's roar of fury shook the ground beneath their feet. It launched itself forward, covering the distance between them in a single bound, its axe descending with enough force to cleave a battle titan in half. Saitama casually stepped to one side and threw a punch. It wasn't even a particularly impressive punch by his standards, just a basic jab, the kind he might use to swat a particularly annoying mosquito. But when his fist connected with the greater demon's chest, the results were immediate and absolute. Scarbrand, the exiled terror of 1,000 worlds, veteran of the war in heaven, favored champion of the blood, God himself, simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no dramatic death cry, no final curse. One moment there was a 30-meter-tall engine of destruction, and the next there was only empty air and a faint smell of ozone. The silence that followed was so complete that it seemed to drain sound from the very universe. Colonel Castor's bolt pistol fell from nerveless fingers. His guardsmen stood frozen in positions of useless cover, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Saitama brushed a small speck of brass dust from his knuckles and looked around, hopefully. So, he said to the assembled soldiers, does anyone know where I might find a shopping center? Commissar Albrecht's hands shook as he updated his report. Subject has terminated a greater demon of corn with a single unarmed strike. Demon showed no resistance to the attack. Recommend immediate escalation to highest possible threat classification. Request guidance on how to classify an entity capable of casually destroying the servants of the dark gods. Also, subject continues to inquire about commercial food vendors. Psychological profile remains unclear. In the distance, the warp storms that had raged above Mordian 7th for 43 days began to dissipate, as if even the ruinous powers were reconsidering their assault on this particular world. And somewhere in the depths of the warp, 4 ancient intelligences felt a tremor of something they had not experienced in millions of years: uncertainty. The warning klaxons aboard the Imperial Navy vessel Righteous Fury had been wailing for 17 minutes straight when Captain Mordian Thrace received the transmission that would haunt his dreams for the remainder of his mercifully short life. Fleet command to all vessels. The voice crackled through the Vox grills, distorted by the psychic interference that Chaos fleets carried like a plague. Long-range augers detect massive warp translation event in system periphery. Count is Emperor preserve us. Count is 347 contacts. Thrace felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. His own battle group consisted of 12 vessels, a respectable force for dealing with raiders or pirates, but utterly inadequate against a chaos armada of such magnitude. Through the viewport of his command deck, he could see the stars themselves beginning to bleed as reality warped around the approaching fleet. "All stations combat alert!" He commanded, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. "Signal the surface. Tell them we'll hold as long as we can." On the surface of Mordian 7th, the transmission reached Colonel Castor's command post just as he was attempting to process reports of the mysterious figure who had somehow erased a greater demon from existence. The colonel's weathered face went pale as he absorbed the tactical implications. 300 ships, he muttered, staring at the tactical display with the expression of a man watching his own execution. Against 12 of ours. Inquisitor Seraphis looked up from his conversation with Commissar Albrecht, his scarred features tight with calculation. "Where is the asset?" "Still asking the men about grocery stores, sir." Albrecht replied, his voice carrying the strain of a man whose worldview had been systematically demolished over the past few hours. "Private Hendricks is currently explaining why there aren't any supermarkets in active war zones." Through the command post's reinforced windows, they could see Saitama in earnest conversation with a squad of guardsmen. The soldiers appeared to be taking turns trying to explain the concept of military field rations to someone who seemed genuinely confused about why armies didn't simply shop for food like normal people. "The enemy fleet will achieve orbital bombardment position in approximately 40 minutes. Colonel Castor reported, consulting his chronometer with the precision of a man counting down to doomsday. "Our evacuation capacity is insufficient." It was the kind of understatement that only Imperial officers could deliver with a straight face. 6 million civilians, 3 regiments of guard, and evacuation capacity for perhaps 50,000 souls. The mathematics of survival were brutally simple. Above them, the first of the Chaos vessels began to resolve against the star field, vast constructs of corrupted metal and living bone, their hulls crawling with demonic entities that served as both crew and weapons. The lead ship alone was larger than most Imperial space stations, its cathedral spires twisted into obscene geometries that hurt to perceive directly. Captain Thrace watched the approaching armada through his command deck's tactical display, each red icon representing enough firepower to sterilize continents. His own vessels were already moving to intercept their void shields, powering up and weapons training toward the enemy. It would be a glorious last stand, the kind that generated legends and inspired future generations of Navy officers. It would also be completely futile. "Sir," his weapons officer reported, voice tight with the strain of maintaining composure in the face of certain death, "Enemy fleet is launching assault craft. Preliminary count suggests 10,000 individual contacts. 10,000 boarding pods, dropships, and demon engines, each carrying warriors who had spent millennia perfecting the art of destruction. Against this, the Imperial Navy could offer perhaps 2,000 souls and the blessing of the Emperor." "Signal all vessels," Thrace commanded. "We die with honor, for Terra and the throne." The response came back immediately from his fellow captains, 11 voices raised in defiant prayer as they prepared to sell their lives as dearly as possible. The Imperial Navy had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. Today would not be one of those days, but they would ensure the enemy remembered the price of Imperial blood. On the surface, Saitama looked up from his conversation with the increasingly frustrated guardsman, noticing the new stars that had appeared in the sky. Except, They weren't stars, they were the engine fires of a vast fleet, visible even through the planet's atmosphere. "Huh," he said, squinting upward. "Those are pretty big spaceships. Are they here for some kind of celebration?" Colonel Castor opened his mouth to explain the concept of orbital bombardment, then closed it again. How did one explain the imminent extinction of 6 million souls to someone who had just asked if a Chaos Armada was here for a party? "They're not friendly ships," he managed finally. "Oh." Saitama continued staring upward with the expression of someone trying to solve a mildly interesting puzzle. "They look kind of mean, actually, all spiky and stuff, and they're making that weird humming sound." The weird humming sound was actually the psychic emanation of 347 vessels dedicated to the dark gods, their very presence in real space causing reality to fray at the edges. That an unaugmented human could perceive it directly suggested either latent psychic abilities or something far more disturbing. "I'm going to go take a closer look," Saitama announced, apparently reaching some internal decision. "Sir," Commissar Albrecht said quickly, "I don't think that's advisable. Those ships are extremely dangerous, and space is a vacuum environment unsuitable for human life." Saitama blinked. "Oh, right. No air in space." He paused, considering. "Well, I've done this before. Should be fine." Before anyone could explain why this plan was fundamentally flawed on multiple levels, Saitama crouched slightly and launched himself skyward with the casual ease of someone hopping over a puddle. The sonic boom that followed shattered every window in a 3-kilometer radius. Aboard the lead Chaos vessel, Eternal Torment, Daemon Prince Malthazar, the twice-cursed, felt the first stirrings of unease as his fleet approached the pathetic Imperial defenders. The battle would be a slaughter, as all proper battles should be, but something felt different about this engagement. His bridge crew, a mixture of corrupted mortals and lesser demons, went about their duties with the efficiency of beings who had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. The ship's weapons, a fusion of chaos technology and demonic essence, charged with energies capable of cracking continents. It was then that the proximity alarms began screaming. "Report," Malthazar commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't exist in normal space. "My prince," his sensor officer stammered, "there appears to be a single humanoid contact approaching from the planet's surface. No vehicle signature detected. Velocity suggests impossible acceleration parameters. Chat." Through the bridge's massive viewport, they could see it, a tiny speck of yellow moving through the void with impossible speed, leaving a trail of displaced cosmic dust in its wake. As it drew closer, they could make out more details. A humanoid figure in civilian clothing, apparently unprotected from the vacuum of space, casually flying toward their fleet as if space travel were a weekend hobby. "What manner of sorcery is this?" Malthazar growled, his demonic essence recoiling from something his supernatural senses couldn't classify. The figure came to a halt, approximately 50 meters from the Eternal Torment's bow, hanging motionless in space as if standing on solid ground. It appeared to be looking around with the expression of a tourist examining interesting architecture. "Hail it," Malthazar commanded. The Vox transmission that followed would be remembered by the few survivors as the single most surreal moment in the history of interstellar warfare. "Hello there," came a cheerful voice speaking perfect low Gothic. "Sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you guys might know where I could find a grocery store. I've been looking all day and haven't had much luck." Malthazar stared at the communication array as if it had personally offended him. In 10,000 years of existence through countless campaigns across the galaxy, he had never encountered anything quite like this. "You dare mock the might of chaos!" he roared, his voice carrying enough psychic force to shatter the minds of baseline humans. "I am Malthazar, the twice-cursed. This fleet carries the wrath of the dark gods themselves." "Oh," the figure replied, sounding genuinely apologetic. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt anything important. I just really need to find some cabbage before the sale ends." The silence that followed lasted exactly 17 seconds before Malthasar's fury overcame his confusion. "Open fire, destroy this impudent fool." Chat diso. 347 vessels of the Chaos Fleet opened fire simultaneously. Lance batteries, plasma cannons, demon-possessed projectiles, and weapons that existed in 17 different dimensions all converged on a single point in space where a man in yellow clothing hung motionless. The resulting explosion could be seen from 3 star systems away. When the light faded and the sensors cleared, the target was still there, apparently unharmed, and brushing small particles of debris from his clothing with the air of someone dealing with a minor inconvenience. "That was pretty bright," Saitama observed conversationally. "You guys really like your special effects, don't you?" Malthasar felt something he had not experienced since his mortal death 10 millennia ago, genuine fear. Not the ritualistic terror that fed chaos, but the primal recognition of something utterly beyond his comprehension. "What? What are you?" he whispered. "I'm Saitama," came the reply. "I'm a hero for fun, and I'm still looking for a grocery store, so if you could maybe point me in the right direction, that would be great." The Demon Prince's response was to channel every scrap of his accumulated power into a single reality-shattering attack. Warp energies that could unmake planets focused into a beam of pure destruction, accompanied by the screams of 10,000 demons. Saitama caught it with one hand. "Look," he said patiently, "I can see you guys are busy with some kind of light show, but I really do need to find a store before they close. Could you maybe take a break from the fireworks for a minute?" What happened next defied every law of physics, every principle of warfare, and every assumption about the nature of reality that the Chaos Fleet had operated under for 10 millennia. Saitama threw a punch. It wasn't even a particularly impressive punch by his standards, just a basic straight jab, the kind he might use to swat an annoying fly. But when his fist moved forward, the vacuum of space itself seemed to compress ahead of it, creating a visible shockwave that propagated outward at impossible speed. The shockwave hit the eternal torment first, and the massive vessel simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, not damaged, erased as if it had never been built. The wave continued outward, consuming ship after ship in a perfect sphere of absolute destruction. In the space of 3 seconds, 347 vessels of the Chaos Armada were reduced to their component atoms. 10 million years of accumulated corruption, enough firepower to sterilize sectors, the combined will of the dark gods themselves, all of it simply gone, leaving nothing but empty space and a few confused pieces of cosmic debris. Saitama looked around at the now empty space, scratching his head. "Oops," he said. "I think I hit them too hard." The silence on every remaining Imperial vessel was so complete that it seemed to drain sound from the universe itself. Captain Thrace stood frozen at his command station, staring at sensor readings that his mind refused to process. Where moments before there had been the largest Chaos Armada in recorded history, now there was nothing. "Sensor sweep," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Full spectrum analysis. I want confirmation of what we just witnessed." The response came back in the trembling voice of his Auspex officer. "Sir, there's nothing there. No debris fields, no energy signatures, no trace that the enemy fleet ever existed. Just empty space." On the surface of Mordian 7th, Inquisitor Seraphis watched the tactical displays flicker and reset as they struggled to process the absence of 347 enemy contacts. His scarred features had gone pale, and his remaining organic eye twitched with the strain of witnessing something that redefined the possible. Commissar Albrecht cleared his throat. "Sir, how do I classify this in my report?" Seraphis stared at the empty space where a moment before the most terrible fleet in Imperial history had been preparing to exterminate 6 million souls. "I have no idea," he whispered. Above them all, Saitama descended slowly through the atmosphere, his casual flight through vacuum apparently as effortless as walking down a street. When he landed in the command post's courtyard, he looked around at the assembled officers with the expression of someone hoping for good news. "So," he said hopefully, "did anyone happen to spot a shopping center while I was up there? I didn't see any from orbit. But maybe I missed something. In the deepest reaches of the warp, where reality dissolved into pure concept and thought became substance, 4 ancient intelligences felt the tremor that rippled through the Imperium like a scream given form. The destruction of Malthazar's fleet had sent shockwaves through dimensions that mortals could not perceive, alerting every entity that fed upon the psychic emanations of the material realm. The realm of Khorne materialized first, a landscape of brass and bone, where rivers of blood flowed beneath skies the color of eternal war. Here, atop a throne built from the skulls of 10 billion warriors, the blood god stirred with something approaching interest. The massive figure wreathed in brass armor and crowned with horns that could pierce stars leaned forward as the echoes of absolute violence reached him. "Curious?" Khorne's voice rumbled across the brass plains, each word carrying the weight of every battle ever fought. "The fleet of the twice-cursed has been erased." From the crystal labyrinth, where knowledge twisted into impossible geometries and schemes bred like living things, came the chittering laughter of Tzeentch. The architect of fate manifested as a constantly shifting mass of eyes, beaks and feathers, each form more impossible than the last. "Erased is such a limited term," my choleric brother Tzeentch's voice carried harmonics that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. 347 vessels of considerable power simply unraveled. But by what agency? My sight cannot penetrate the circumstances. This troubles me greatly. The Garden of Nurgle bloomed into existence alongside the others, a realm of beautiful decay where life and death danced in eternal partnership. The Plague Father emerged from his cauldron of creation, his corpulent form radiating the contentment of entropy accepted. Flies buzzed around his antlers, and his laughter was the sound of compost becoming soil. "Ah, Grandfather Nurgle finds this most amusing." The great unclean one chuckled, his voice carrying the warmth of inevitable decay. "Something exists that defies even our understanding. How delightfully unexpected it has been, so long since anything truly surprised us." From the palace of pleasure, where sensation was refined into art and excess became philosophy, Slaanesh emerged in a form too perfect and terrible to fully perceive. The Prince of Chaos radiated an aura of sensory overload that made reality itself seem dull by comparison. "Surprise, yes." Slaanesh's voice was silk, wrapped around razors, honey laced with poison. "But consider the implications, my siblings. Here is something new, something we have never tasted, never corrupted, never experienced. I find myself quite intrigued." The 4 powers of ruin regarded each other across the impossible distances of the warp, their combined attention focused on the single point in reality where their carefully ordered game of cosmic chess had just been disrupted by an unknown player. The entity destroyed Malthazar without effort. Khorne continued his brass throne creaking as he shifted his massive bulk. No ritual, no sorcery, no plague, no excess, merely force, pure absolute force. I confess a certain admiration. Tzeentch's multitude of eyes blinked in patterns that hurt to perceive. But force without purpose, without plan, without meaning. This entity acts without scheme or design. When I attempt to divine its future actions, I see only void, as if it exists outside the very concept of fate itself. Perhaps that is why Grandfather finds it so amusing. Nurgle interjected, his rotting smile stretching across features that were simultaneously hideous and strangely beautiful. For 10 million years we have played the great game with mortals who dance to our designs, willing or not. Now comes something that appears immune to our influence entirely. It neither rages, nor schemes, nor despairs, nor indulges. It simply is. Slanesh's form shifted through configurations that would have driven mortal minds to madness with their impossible beauty. But surely it must desire something. All beings desire. To exist without want, without hunger, without need, such a state would be the ultimate perversion of existence itself. I must know what drives it. It seeks vegetables. Korn rumbled his tone, carrying a mixture of confusion and grudging respect. Mundane sustenance from commercial vendors. This is its driving obsession. The silence that followed this statement lasted exactly 49 seconds, a span of time that in the warp could encompass the rise and fall of civilizations. Vegetables. Tzeentch repeated slowly, his vast intellect struggling to process the cosmic implications of grocery shopping as a primary motivation. Nurgle's laughter bubbled up from depths that predated stellar formation. Oh, this is rich, a being of such power, focused entirely on the most mundane aspects of mortal existence. It is beautiful in its simplicity. Slanesh's perfect features arranged themselves into an expression of fascination so intense it warped space around it. To be so powerful, yet so ordinary in desire. There is an aesthetic to this that I find almost overwhelming. The entity represents an unknown factor, Korn declared, rising from his throne with the sound of tectonic plates shifting. It cannot be corrupted, cannot be predicted, cannot be understood. This is unacceptable. Agreed. Tzeentch's voice carried undertones of frustration that rippled through the crystal labyrinth. The great game requires all players to follow certain fundamental rules. This, Saitama, appears to exist outside those rules entirely. So what do we do about our little anomaly? Slanesh purred the question, carrying implications that made reality itself shiver. We cannot corrupt it through the usual means. It shows no rage harbors, no ambitious plans, suffers no despair, and pursues no excess. It is remarkably pure. Nurgle's expression grew thoughtful, his ancient wisdom pondering possibilities that stretched across eons. Perhaps we approach this incorrectly. Rather than seeking to corrupt or control, we should test it, discover the limits of this immunity. After all, even the Emperor can be wounded. Yes, Korn's approval rumbled across dimensional barriers. A test. Let us craft something that will reveal the true nature of this being, something that combines our strengths. Tzeentch's countless eyes focused with predatory intensity. A collaboration, then. How novel. My schemes, your rage, Nurgle's endurance, Slanesh's perfection. We create something specifically designed to challenge an entity that appears to challenge the fundamental nature of chaos itself. A being of our combined will. Slanesh added the concept, sending ripples of anticipation through the Palace of Pleasure. Something that embodies the purest essence of what we represent. If this Saitama can withstand that, then we will know we face something truly extraordinary. Nurgle finished his smile, carrying the weight of inevitable entropy. And grandfather does so love extraordinary things. The four powers of ruin began to weave their essences together, creating something that had never existed in the 10 million years of their eternal conflict. Not a greater demon bound to one patron, but a fusion of their combined might, rage and wisdom, decay and perfection bound together by will that could unmake reality itself. From the eye of terror that wound in space where the warp bled into reality, something began to stir. Something that carried the fury of eternal war, the cunning of impossible schemes, the inevitability of entropy, and the terrible beauty of absolute perfection. Let us see. Korn's voice echoed across all dimensions. What manner of hero this Saitama truly is. The ritual began, and reality itself held its breath. The first sign that something unprecedented was about to occur came not from the planet's surface, but from the astropaths stationed aboard the orbital monitoring stations. Three of them began screaming simultaneously, not the controlled vocalizations of psychers channeling the Emperor's light, but the raw animalistic shrieks of minds touching something so fundamentally wrong that sanity itself recoiled. Inquisitor Seraphis felt his scarred features drain of color as the emergency Vox transmissions flooded his command post. "All stations report massive warp disturbance," he announced to the assembled officers, his voice carrying the strain of a man watching reality prepare to collapse. "Origin point eye of terror, magnitude unprecedented." Commissar Albrecht looked up from his data slate where he'd been attempting to compose a report that captured the impossibility of the day's events. "Phew. Sir, how do we classify unprecedented in a galaxy that has already witnessed the Horus Heresy and the opening of the Great Rift?" Before Seraphis could respond, the sky began to bleed. Not metaphorically, but with actual crimson liquid that defied every law of physics by existing in a planetary atmosphere while simultaneously being composed of pure warp energy. The blood rain hissed where it struck the ground, each droplet creating small tears in reality through which glimpses of impossible geometries could be perceived. Colonel Castor's tactical display began registering readings that should not have been possible. "Sir," he reported, his voice tight with the strain of maintaining composure. "Long-range sensors detect a spatial distortion approximately 17,000 light-years from our position. Source appears to be the Eye of Terror itself. 17,000 light-years. The distance that should have provided absolute protection from even the most catastrophic warp phenomena. Yet somehow something occurring in that cursed region of space was affecting local reality with such force that its influence crossed the galaxy instantaneously. In the Eye of Terror, where the four Chaos Gods had woven their essences together, something vast began to take shape. It was not born as demons were born through ritual and sacrifice, but assembled from the pure conceptual force of what the dark gods represented. Its body was wrought from the brass of eternal war, its mind constructed from schemes that spanned millennia, its flesh animated by decay that gave life meaning, and its soul forged from desires so perfect they became terrible. The entity that emerged from their collaboration stood 3 kilometers tall, its form shifting between states of matter, as if the universe could not decide how to classify its existence. When it moved, reality rippled around it like water disturbed by a thrown stone. When it spoke, its voice was heard simultaneously on 10,000 worlds. "I am wrath," it declared, and every weapon in the galaxy grew slightly sharper. "I am cunning," and every plan became more complex. "I am inevitability," and every living thing felt the touch of entropy. "I am perfection," and every sensation became more intense. "I am the avatar of ruin, sent to test the one who defies the natural order." The manifestation tore open a rent in space-time that connected the Eye of Terror directly to Mordian 7's orbital space. Through this wound in reality, the avatar began to emerge its passage, causing the entire system's star to flicker, as if uncertain whether it should continue existing. On the planet's surface, every piece of electronic equipment simultaneously registered readings that exceeded their maximum parameters. Vehicle engines died. Vox networks fell silent. The very air became thick with a pressure that seemed to push against the soul itself. Saitama looked up from his conversation with a group of increasingly concerned guardsmen, noticing that the sky had developed what appeared to be a very large hole with something even larger trying to squeeze through it. "Huh," he said, tilting his head as he observed the cosmic entity forcing its way into normal space. "That's a really big monster, and it's pretty loud too." Indeed, the avatar's emergence was accompanied by a sound that existed in dimensions humans could not normally perceive, a harmony of destruction that made every conscious being in the system feel their mortality as a physical weight. Lesser minds simply shut down rather than process the implications of something so fundamentally hostile to existence itself. Saitama. The Avatar's voice spoke directly into every mind within a dozen light years, bypassing the normal mechanisms of hearing, to resonate in the depths of consciousness itself. I have come to measure your worth against the combined might of chaos eternal. The entity's massive head, which bore features from humanity's darkest nightmares, arranged in configurations that hurt to perceive, turned toward the small figure in yellow standing on the planet's surface. Despite the distance, the Avatar hung in high orbit, while Saitama remained planet-side. They regarded each other with perfect clarity across the vacuum of space. "Oh," Saitama replied conversationally, apparently unimpressed by the cosmic scope of what he faced. "Are you here about the grocery store thing too? Because I've been asking around all day and nobody seems to know where I can buy some cabbage." The Avatar of Ruin paused its vast intellect, processing this response through mental frameworks designed to analyze threats to universal order. For 17 seconds, it attempted to reconcile the concept of cosmic defiance with inquiries about produce shopping. What? The entity managed its voice, carrying harmonics of genuine confusion that rippled through the warp itself. As the Avatar prepared its response, something unprecedented occurred. The entity's massive form began tearing a direct rift in space-time, connecting the Eye of Terror itself to Mordian 7's orbital space. This was no mere manifestation. The Avatar was creating a permanent bridge between the material realm and the heart of chaos itself. "Cabbage," Saitama repeated helpfully. "You know the green leafy vegetable? I heard there was a sale, but I can't find any stores that are open. You're pretty big. Maybe you can see farther than I can." In the deepest reaches of the warp, 4 ancient intelligences felt something they had not experienced in 10 million years of existence: complete bafflement. Their carefully crafted avatar, designed to test the limits of an entity that had already proven immune to conventional chaos, corruption, had just been asked for shopping advice. The Avatar's response was to channel every scrap of power that the dark gods had invested in its creation. Warp energy sufficient to crack planets, focused into a single reality-shattering attack that existed simultaneously as pure rage, impossible cunning, inevitable decay, and perfect sensation. The very concept of destruction given form and directed with malevolent intelligence. The attack struck Mordian 7's atmosphere and simply stopped. Not blocked, not deflected, but halted by what appeared to be Saitama's casual attention. "Look," Saitama said patiently, reaching up to catch the cosmic destruction with one hand, like someone swatting a particularly slow-moving ball. "I can see you're upset about something, but I really haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to find a store before they close." The silence that followed lasted exactly 93 seconds. Across the galaxy, warp storms flickered and died as even the forces of chaos paused to process what they had just witnessed. "Impossible." The Avatar declared, its voice carrying undertones of something that might have been panic. "No mortal being can withstand the combined will of the dark gods." "I'm not really sure what you mean by that," Saitama replied, examining the handful of cosmic destruction he had caught. It felt warm, like holding a small campfire. "But you're being really loud and it's giving me a headache. Could you maybe quiet down a little?" The Avatar's response was to unleash everything, not merely its own power, but direct manifestations of the chaos gods themselves. Korn's rage given substance. Tzeentch's schemes made manifest. Nurgle's decay, weaponized. Slaaneish's perfection turned to destruction. The combined assault was sufficient to unmake solar systems, to reduce the concept of order to cosmic background radiation. Saitama sighed. "I guess not." He looked up at the 3-kilometer-tall embodiment of everything the universe feared most, and his expression carried the mild annoyance of someone dealing with a neighbor's overly loud music. "This is getting ridiculous," he said. "I just want to buy some vegetables." The punch he threw was not his most powerful. He reserved serious punch for opponents who actually required effort. This was merely what he thought of as getting someone's attention. The shockwave that resulted from contact between his fist and the avatar's cosmic essence propagated outward at speeds that made light seem sluggish by comparison. Reality itself compressed ahead of the impact, creating a visible distortion that could be perceived from neighboring star systems. The avatar of ruin, the combined manifestation of 4 chaos gods' power, the embodiment of 10 million years of accumulated malevolence, simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed in any conventional sense, erased from the fundamental structure of reality as if it had never been conceived. The shockwave continued past the avatar's former position, racing through the direct rift that the entity had created between real space and the Eye of Terror itself. For the first time in 10 millennia, that wound in reality experienced something that could only be described as pain. The Eye shuddered, and the effect cascaded across the galaxy instantaneously. Across 17 sectors, every psyker simultaneously felt the tremor that ran through the foundations of chaos itself. On Terra, 300 astropaths collapsed as one blood streaming from their empty sockets. Navigation systems throughout the Imperium began registering impossible readings, as the Eye's fluctuations disrupted warp travel across entire subsectors. On distant worlds, chaos cultists fell to their knees as their demonic patrons suddenly went silent. In the deepest dungeons of Inquisition, facilities bound, demons began screaming in frequencies that existed outside normal space-time. On Terra itself, the Golden Throne registered fluctuations that had not been recorded since the Horus Heresy. The 4 chaos gods in their respective realms experienced something that transcended mere surprise. The Avatar had not simply been defeated, it had been rendered null erased so completely that they could find no trace of its ever having existed. The very concept of their combined will had been negated with casual indifference. "Well," Saitama said, examining his fist for any signs of damage and finding none that was louder than I expected. The rent in space-time began to collapse, reality reasserting itself with the kind of cosmic sigh that accompanies the end of nightmares. The blood rain ceased. The oppressive weight of hostile divinity lifted from every conscious mind in the system. And in the sudden profound silence that followed, every electronic system on Mordian 7th came back online simultaneously, their displays showing readings that would require entirely new classifications. Inquisitor Seraphis stood in his command post staring at sensor data that reported the complete absence of what had moments before been the most powerful manifestation of chaos ever recorded. His remaining organic eye twitched as he processed the implications of what he had witnessed. "Commissar Albrecht," he said quietly, his voice carrying the strain of a man whose worldview had just been systematically demolished and rebuilt in the space of 93 seconds. "Yes, sir. I need you to update our threat classification protocols." "What classification should I assign to the entity?" Sir Seraphis was quiet for a long moment, watching through the reinforced windows as Saitama resumed his conversation with the guardsman about the apparent lack of grocery stores in active war zones. "I have no idea," he said finally. "Create a new category, call it Saitama class, and mark it as the highest possible threat rating. Higher than the chaos gods themselves." "Sir." Seraphis looked at the tactical display, showing the slowly normalizing readings from the Eye of Terror, the wound in reality that had just been made to flinch by a man asking about vegetable prices. "Significantly higher, Commissar. Significantly higher." In the distance, Saitama could be heard asking if anyone knew whether supermarkets on other planets might have better selection, since this world seemed to be lacking in the basic necessities of civilian life. The emergency session of the High Lords of Terra convened in the Senatorum Imperialis at precisely 0347 hours Terran Standard Time. The assembled representatives of humanity's mightiest institutions gathered around a table that had witnessed decisions affecting the fate of trillions, but none quite like this. Lord Commander Gilliman's hololithic projection dominated the chamber, his perfect features tight with the concentration of a man attempting to process the impossible. Before him lay reports from 17 different sources, each confirming the same unprecedented sequence of events. A single individual had somehow negated the combined will of the chaos gods themselves. The entity designated Saitama has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our current understanding of physical law. Inquisitor Seraphis reported his scarred features illuminated by the chamber's ancient glow globes. In the space of 6 hours, he has destroyed a greater demon, erased a chaos fleet, and rendered null a manifestation of the dark god's combined power. Additionally, his actions have caused severe disruption to warp travel in 17 sectors. Grand Master Voldus of the Grey Knights leaned forward, his Terminator armor bearing the scars of centuries spent battling the forces of the warp. "You speak of impossibilities, Inquisitor. No mortal being possesses such power. Therefore, this entity must be something else, perhaps a manifestation of the Emperor's will given form." "The Ecclesiarchy concurs," added Cardinal Montrose, his golden aquila gleaming in the chamber's light. 300 pilgrims have already petitioned for the entity's canonization as a living saint. The faithful see his arrival as divine intervention. "Ipi or," interrupted Lord Inquisitor Torquemada Coteas, his augmetic eye glowing with cold fire. "It represents the most sophisticated infiltration attempt in human history. Consider an entity appears, claiming ignorance of the Imperium, demonstrates impossible power and shows no corruption despite exposure to direct chaos influence." Fabricator General Belisarius Call's mechanical voice added its harmonic tones to the debate. The Mechanicus requests permission to conduct detailed analysis of the entity's physiological parameters. Such unprecedented augmentation could advance our understanding of human enhancement by millennia. Captain General Trajan Valoris of the Adeptus Custodes raised a golden gauntlet. "The entity shows no hostile intent toward the Emperor's realm. His actions have consistently protected Imperial citizens and eliminated threats to human survival. The 10,000 advocate for cautious cooperation." The debate that followed would later be classified at the highest levels of Imperial security, its transcripts sealed in vaults that would remain untouched for millennia. For 3 hours, the greatest minds in the Imperium wrestled with a question that had no precedent in 10,000 years of human history: what to do with a being who appeared capable of ending their eternal war through simple indifference. "The entity shows no hostile intent." Captain General Trajan Valoris of the Adeptus Custodes observed his golden armor reflecting the chamber's ancient light. "His actions have consistently protected Imperial citizens and eliminated threats to human survival. By any rational assessment, he should be considered an asset." "Rational assessment fails when applied to the irrational," Lord Inquisitor Cotes countered sharply. "This being exists outside our understanding, our control, our ability to predict or contain. In a galaxy where knowledge is power and power is survival, ignorance of such magnitude represents an existential threat." Gilliman's voice cut through the debate with the authority of 10 millennia of strategic experience. "The fundamental question remains, is this entity a weapon that can be directed or a force of nature that must be endured?" Neither came the response from an unexpected source. Tech Dominus Belisarius had been silently analyzing data throughout the session, his mechanical mind processing variables that biological cognition struggled to encompass. Based on behavioral analysis, the entity appears to be exactly what he claims: a civilian seeking commercial food vendors. His power is incidental to his purpose. The silence that followed this statement lasted exactly 47 seconds. "Are you suggesting," Grandmaster Voldus said slowly, "that the most powerful being we have encountered in 10,000 years is motivated primarily by grocery shopping?" "Affirmative. All evidence supports this conclusion." "Three?" While the High Lords debated in their sealed chamber, the streets of Terra buzzed with whispers that carried the weight of desperate hope. In the hab blocks where billions of citizens eked out lives of quiet servitude, word spread through unofficial channels about the stranger who had fallen from the sky. "I saw him myself," claimed servitor tender Yolana Vex, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had witnessed miracle. "Standing right there in the cathedral plaza talking to the custodes like they were old friends. No fear, no bowing, just normal conversation." Her neighbor factory worker Jorik Thane nodded eagerly. "My cousin's in the guard. He voxed from Mordian 7 said this saint fellow destroyed an entire chaos fleet by himself, just flew up into space and made them disappear." The stories grew in the telling as stories do when hope is scarce and miracles are desperately needed. A man who showed no fear of the Imperium's greatest champions. A warrior who faced demons with casual indifference. A saint who spoke to common soldiers as equals. In the depths of the underhive where imperial authority rarely penetrated, different conversations were taking place. Thieves and smugglers, mutants and outcasts, all the forgotten souls who survived in the cracks of the Golden Throne's dominion, they whispered of something more radical than sainthood. "What if," asked a one-eyed woman whose name had been burned from imperial records, "what if someone exists who simply doesn't care about their rules?" Meanwhile, the subject of these theological debates sat on the marble steps of the Cathedral of the Savior Emperor, watching the endless stream of pilgrims and officials who flowed through Terra's sacred districts. Several custodes maintained discreet overwatch from nearby positions, their golden armor gleaming in the artificial light that banished Terra's eternal night. Saitama had spent the past 4 hours engaged in conversations with various imperial officials, each attempting to determine his intentions, capabilities, or allegiances. The results had been uniformly frustrating for the interrogators and mildly boring for their subject. A small crowd of civilians had gathered at a respectful distance, their faces bearing the mix of awe and terror that accompanied proximity to the divine. Some prayed, others simply stared, and a few of the braver souls occasionally called out questions about the Emperor's favor or the nature of his mission. To all of these, Saitama responded with the same patient confusion he had shown since his arrival. He wasn't on a mission. He didn't know who this Emperor person was. He was just lost and looking for a grocery store. "Sir," a young voice interrupted his contemplation. Saitama looked down to see a child, perhaps 8 years old, wearing the threadbare robes that marked her as one of the cathedral's orphaned wards. Her eyes held the peculiar brightness of those who had learned to find wonder in small things. "Are you really a saint?" she asked with the directness that only children possessed. Saitama considered the question seriously. "I don't think so. I'm just a guy who does hero stuff sometimes. Mostly I just try to keep my neighborhood safe and find good deals at the market." "Oh?" The child looked disappointed for a moment, then brightened. "Are you going to stay here?" "I don't know," Saitama admitted. "I'm still trying to figure out how to get home. This place is really confusing and nobody seems to know where the grocery stores are." The child giggled, a sound so rare on Terra that several nearby custodes shifted slightly in their positions. "We don't have grocery stores in the Cathedral District, but there's a food distribution center in Sector 7 Alpha. They give out ration packs on 7th day. Ration packs, nutrient paste and protein bars. They're not very good, but they keep you alive." Saitama frowned. "That doesn't sound very appetizing. Where I come from, you can buy fresh vegetables, meat, eggs, all kinds of stuff. And they have sales where everything gets cheaper." The child's eyes widened. "That sounds amazing. Can you take me there sometime?" For the first time since his arrival on Terra, Saitama's expression carried genuine sadness. "I wish I could kid, but I don't know how to get back yet." As Terra's artificial day cycle reached its evening phase, Commissar Albrecht approached the cathedral steps with the measured pace of a man delivering news he wasn't sure how to interpret. His latest orders had come directly from the Senatorum Imperialis, bearing seals that granted him authority to speak for the High Lords themselves. "Sir," he addressed Saitama formally. I have been instructed to inform you that the Lords of Terra have reached a decision regarding your situation. Saitama looked up hopefully. Did they find a grocery store? No, sir. They have determined that you represent a classification beyond current Imperial protocols. As such, you are to be granted the status of honored guest. What does that mean? Albrecht consulted his data slate reading from text that had been debated, revised, and approved by the most powerful individuals in human space. It means you are free to remain on Terra or travel to any Imperial world of your choosing. You will be provided with quarter sustenance and transportation as requested. In exchange, the Imperium would be grateful for any assistance you might provide in matters of planetary defense. Saitama nodded thoughtfully. That's nice of them, I guess, but I still want to go home. I understand, sir. The tech priests are researching methods of dimensional travel that might facilitate your return. Dimensional travel? Saitama's interest perked up slightly. Like through that swirly portal thing I fell out of? Potentially, yes, sir. Saitama stood up, stretching muscles that had casually redefined the possible over the past day. Well, I suppose I can wait a little while longer. Maybe explore this place a bit. It's certainly different from City Z. He looked around at the massive spires of the Imperial Palace, the endless streams of humanity flowing through streets designed for armies, the golden giants who watched his every movement with inhuman patience. Though I have to say, he continued conversationally, you guys really need to work on your civilian infrastructure. A city this big should have at least a few supermarkets. How do people buy food around here? Commissar Albrecht's eye twitched slightly. Even after everything he had witnessed, the entity's priorities remained incomprehensible. I will look into that matter, sir. Thanks. Oh, and if you find any places that sell cabbage, let me know. I'm still hoping to catch that sale. As artificial night settled over Terra and the endless bustle of the most important world in human space continued its eternal rhythm, Saitama remained on the cathedral steps. Around him, the Imperium of man grappled with questions that had no answers and problems that defied solution. But for the man in yellow who had accidentally redefined the possible, only one question truly mattered in a galaxy of endless war, 1,000,000 worlds and 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge. Why was it so difficult to find a decent grocery store? The stars offered no answer, but somewhere in the vast machinery of Imperial bureaucracy, a single data slate entry was being processed that would eventually change everything. Request for establishment of civilian food markets on Terra. Priority urgent. Authorization Saitama-class entity. Expected completion unknown. Perhaps some problems, no matter how cosmic in scope, had surprisingly simple solutions.